Don't touch my bespoke suit with your garlic-smelling hands. Luke Vance violently slapped my hand away. The force was so great that I stumbled backward, crashing into the champagne tower behind me. The crystal glasses shattered against the expensive marble floor of the Plaza Hotel, emitting a piercing, deafening crash. The originally bustling Manhattan elite business gala instantly fell into a deathly silence. Countless gazes, laced with mockery and scrutiny, fell upon me like heavy stones. The glaring, cold light of the crystal chandelier poured down, mercilessly highlighting the washed-out 3-year-old clearance rack dress I was wearing. Standing in front of me, Luke was clad in a perfectly tailored Italian handmade suit, his wrist flashing the cold, hard gleam of a Patek Philippe watch. He was undoubtedly the most dazzling new tech billionaire of the evening. Luke, please don't get so mad at Samantha. She probably just hasn't seen a grand occasion like this before and wanted to hold on to you for a sense of security. A sickeningly sweet voice cut through the silence. Chloe, wearing a high-profile red designer gown, intimately held onto Luke's mother's arm as she gracefully walked to his side. She appeared to be smoothing things over for me, but her eyes flashed with undisguised provocation. As she brushed past me, her wrist seemed to slip in a seemingly accidental motion. The crimson liquid from her wine glass splashed with pinpoint accuracy onto the hem of my faded, light-colored dress. The ice-cold liquid trailed down my calf, leaving me looking utterly wretched. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, Samantha. Total accident. Chloe covered her mouth, letting out an exaggerated, artificial gasp. She then smoothly leaned into Luke's embrace. Luke, Samantha won't be mad at me, right? At home, she always complains about me being clumsy. She wouldn't dare. Barbara Vance, Luke's mother, glared at me fiercely, her wrinkle-lined face full of pure malice. If my son wasn't so soft-hearted, a barren woman like her who only knows how to be a freeloader at home would have been kicked out to the streets a long time ago. Bringing her to a billion-dollar gala like this has completely disgraced the Vance family. I gripped the hem of my ruined dress tightly, my nails nearly digging into my palms. 3 years. 3 whole years. When Luke's startup faced a critical funding gap, I kept it a secret from everyone and sold the vintage jewelry my grandmother left me to fill his financial hole. When he stayed up day and night writing code and building projects, I was the one making him hot soup at midnight and organizing his data. When Barbara was hospitalized, I spent endless days and nights by her bedside, cleaning bedpans and feeding her. Now that he had achieved success and possessed a net worth of hundreds of millions, I had become the disgraceful trophy wife he was ashamed to be seen with, the useless freeloader in his mother's eyes. Luke, is that what you think too? I raised my head, staring dead straight at the man I had once loved so deeply. My voice was trembling slightly, not out of fear, but from the rapidly cooling despair deep within my heart. Luke was stung by my gaze, his brows instantly knitting together. Surrounding media personnel had already started raising their cameras. The relentless clicking of shutters acted like a death warrant, stimulating the nerve in his brain called vanity. He desperately needed to establish an image of absolute authority and unyielding power in front of these Wall Street titans and the press. And I was the perfect stepping stone. Why are you looking at me like that? Was my mother wrong? Luke took a large stride forward, and without warning, grabbed a handful of my hair. A tearing agony erupted from my scalp, forcing me to tilt my head up. A resounding slap struck heavily against my right cheek. The force was so brutal that it instantly drew blood from the corner of my mouth. My ears rang violently, and my vision went black for a brief second. This slap is to teach you your place. Without the Vance family, you are nothing. He backhanded me with an even heavier blow. Half of my face swelled up instantly. My hairpin dropped, and my long hair fell in a messy tangle over my shoulders. This slap is for Chloe. She is my chief executive secretary now, the hero who helped me secure the biggest contract of the year. What right do you have to give her an attitude? The third slap landed. My entire body lost its strength, and I collapsed into the scattered shards of glass on the floor. The broken crystals sliced into my knees, and fresh blood mixed with the spilled red wine, spreading across the marble. Know your place. You ever disrespect Chloe or my mother again, and I'll throw you right back to the gutter where I found you. Luke looked down at me from his high horse, as if looking at a nauseating insect. Low whispers erupted from the crowd. No one stepped forward to intervene. In this social circle that worshipped money and trampled on the weak, the dignity of a woman with no background was entirely worthless. Chloe stood behind Luke, a victorious sneer curling the corners of her lips. Barbara proudly raised her chin in triumph. I lay on the freezing marble floor. I did not cry, nor did I even struggle. My tongue swept over the metallic taste of blood at the corner of my mouth, and as I swallowed that iron-like flavor, the very last trace of warmth I held for this marriage was completely extinguished. I closed my eyes. 3 years, Samantha. It is time for this ridiculous game of playing a commoner to end. When I opened my eyes again, the gentle endurance was entirely gone from my gaze. Taking its place was the bone-chilling, absolute apathy that belonged exclusively to the sole heir of the Sterling global conglomerate. I looked at Luke as if I were looking at a dead man, and an eerie, slow smile crept onto my face. Just as Luke felt a chill crawl up his spine from my smile and prepared to raise his foot to kick me again, a roar echoed through the hall. You put your hands on my daughter. Let's see if the Vance family has enough blood to pay for this. The voice was old but boomed like a massive brass bell, carrying an aura of absolute, crushing authority. It hit the room like a thunderclap, violently piercing the domed ceiling of the grand ballroom. The heavy, solid oak doors of the ballroom were violently kicked open from the outside by 2 massive forces, emitting a deafening crash. The security guards and reporters who had been blocking the entrance were roughly shoved aside by an irresistible power. 12 towering, muscular private security contractors dressed in pure black bespoke suits, wearing earpieces, sliced through the crowd like a hot knife through butter, forcing the attendees to part on both sides. At the end of the corridor, an imposing elderly man strode into the hall, his face pale with fury. He was dressed in a dark, classic tailored suit, leaning on an ebony walking stick topped with a silver hawk. The terrifying aura of someone who had held the power of life and death in the financial world for decades radiated from him, causing the temperature in the ballroom to drop below freezing. Mr. Gallagher, one of Manhattan's wealthiest real estate moguls, who had just been sipping champagne and watching the drama unfold, violently trembled the moment he recognized the man. His glass shattered on the floor as he let out an uncontrolled gasp. Mr. Richard Sterling. Richard Sterling, the absolute helmsman of Sterling Global Holdings, a Wall Street titan whose mere stamp of approval could trigger a tsunami across global financial markets. Luke obviously recognized this face, which frequently dominated the covers of top-tier financial magazines like Forbes and Fortune. His mind went completely blank. The arrogance and insolence from a second ago evaporated into thin air. It was replaced by a near-instinctive, pathetic terror. He did not even bother to adjust his slightly messy suit. He aggressively pushed Chloe aside, plastered on the most subservient smile of his life, and quickly walked forward to greet the man. Mr. Sterling, your presence at the Manhattan Business Gala brings absolute honor to us all. I'm Luke Vance of Vance Innovations. We just had a minor domestic misunderstanding over here. I apologize for the spectacle. I will have someone clean it up immediately. Luke bowed low, offering his gold-embossed business card with both hands, his posture as subservient as a dog begging for scraps. Richard Sterling did not even glance at him. The old man's gaze cut straight over the crowd and locked dead onto me, lying in the shards of glass, my face covered in blood. In that moment, I saw the eyes of this old man, who had ruthlessly slaughtered his way through the corporate world for a lifetime, suddenly turn bloodshot. Get out of my way. Richard's voice was hoarse as he spat out those words. Before Luke could even react, one of Richard's personal bodyguards stepped forward. His movements were as fast as lightning. A bone-chilling, crisp, metallic click echoed through the room. A cold, heavy, tactical sidearm was pressed directly against Luke's temple. The freezing touch of the gun barrel caused the blood in Luke's veins to turn into solid ice. Move a muscle, and I will put a hollow point through your skull. The bodyguard's voice carried zero human emotion, and his finger was already resting on the trigger. Luke's legs instantly lost all power. He fell straight to his knees on the hard stone tiles. His face shifted from red to paper white, and then to a dead gray. Cold sweat poured down his forehead like a waterfall, and his teeth chattered uncontrollably. Mr. Sterling, this is a misunderstanding. This is absolutely a misunderstanding. Luke managed to force out a winded, raspy croak from his throat. The surroundings were dead silent. Barbara, who had been arrogant beyond measure just moments ago, rolled her eyes to the back of her head and collapsed limply into a chair, terrified out of her mind. Chloe hugged her head with both arms, curling up under a table, shaking like a leaf, not even daring to breathe. Leaning on his walking stick, Richard walked step by step until he was right in front of me. He slowly knelt down. Those large hands that had signed off on multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions without ever trembling were now shaking violently as they gently cupped my swollen cheek, carefully wiping the blood from the corner of my mouth. "Samantha, Daddy is late." Richard's voice was filled with deep self-reproach and heartbreak. "It is Daddy's fault for letting you suffer like this." Those words, picked up by the ballroom's microphone, were transmitted clearly into the ears of every single person present. It acted like a nuclear bomb detonating within the crowd. That woman, called a freeloader, a disgraced trophy wife with absolutely no background, was actually the only daughter of Richard Sterling. She was the sole heir to the entire Sterling global empire. Luke's pupils shrank to the size of pinholes, his eyeballs instantly crawling with bloodshot veins. He stared at me like he was looking at a monster. His lips quivered violently, but he could not make a sound. Massive terror and a sense of absolute absurdity completely destroyed his sanity. A warm stream of liquid trickled down his trouser leg and pooled onto the floor. He had literally wet himself in sheer terror. Supporting myself on my father's arm, I slowly stood up from the mess. Blood was still running down my knees, but I felt no pain. I took the silk handkerchief offered by a bodyguard, methodically wiping the grime off my hands. Then I looked down at Luke, who was kneeling on the floor. "Mr. Sterling, this is a misunderstanding." "Samantha, this is all a misunderstanding." "Listen to me. Let me explain." Luke finally found his voice. He desperately tried to lunge forward to hug my leg, but the bodyguard kicked him brutally in the chest. He curled up on the floor like a cooked shrimp, dry heaving in agony. "Explain?" I looked at him coldly. "Explain what? Did you not just say that without the Vance family I'm nothing?" I turned my head and looked at Arthur Hayes, the chief operating officer of Sterling Global, who stood in a sharp suit behind my father. Arthur immediately understood, stepped forward, opened his tablet, and announced to the entire room in a loud, merciless voice, "By the order of the chairman of Sterling Global, effective immediately, all financial institutions under the Sterling conglomerate will completely sever all funding ties with Vance Innovations. Within 3 minutes, freeze all corporate accounts of Vance Innovations and the personal accounts of its legal representative, Luke Vance. The Manhattan Tech Campus project, originally scheduled to be heavily funded by Sterling Global, hereby withdraws its letter of intent. Vance Innovations is permanently stripped of all participation rights in this project. Future operations of the project will be taken over entirely by Miss Samantha Sterling." The moment Arthur finished speaking, ringtones erupted all over the ballroom. "Mr. Vance, it is bad. The bank just cut off our line of credit. They are demanding we repay the $50 million bridge loan within 3 days. Mr. Vance, the material suppliers just said they received a strict order from the top to halt all shipments to us immediately. They even refunded our deposit." The cell phone Luke had dropped on the floor vibrated like crazy. Every pop-up notification was a death warrant. The arrival of a financial storm often requires only a single signal. In this Vanity Fair, the businessmen had the sharpest noses. The executives who had just been offering Luke toasts and calling him a brother now backed away rapidly, as if avoiding the plague. Mr. Gallagher walked briskly forward, taking the unsigned contract of intent from his pocket, tearing it to shreds in front of everyone, and throwing the pieces aggressively at Luke's face. "Luke, you have lost your damn mind. You dared to touch the Sterling heiress? From today onward, my real estate firm cuts all ties with you. Count me in. Anyone who does business with Vance Innovations from now on is an enemy of mine." Another executive jumped out to declare his loyalty. When a wall is about to fall, everyone gives it a push. In less than 10 minutes, this rising star of the Manhattan business world was ruthlessly stomped into the mud, turning into a dead dog that everyone avoided. Under the massive shock, Barbara clutched her chest, gasping frantically before finally rolling her eyes back and passing out. Yet, not a single person stepped forward to help her. Chloe bit her lip hard, her eyes filled with terror and the calculated resentment of a shattered dream. I looked at this ridiculous and ugly scene unfolding before me. My heart did not ripple in the slightest. This was the taste of power. This was a capitalistic execution. Luke thought he controlled my destiny, completely unaware that everything he possessed was nothing more than a sandcastle I had casually bestowed upon him. Now that the tide had rushed in, it collapsed instantly, leaving absolutely nothing behind. "Samantha, I was wrong. I was truly wrong. I lost my mind. Please, for the sake of our 3 years of marriage, spare me just this once." Luke ignored the agonizing pain in his chest, violently slamming his forehead against the marble floor. Blood quickly stained the ground. 3 years of marriage? I let out a light laugh, but there was zero warmth in it. Luke, when you were slapping my face just now, did you think about our 3 years of marriage? When you enabled that woman to pour red wine on me, did you think about me being your wife? I bent down, leaning close to his ear, and spoke word by word in a voice only the two of us could hear. Remember what you just said. Without me, Samantha Sterling, you are absolutely nothing. I straightened up, linked my arm through my father's, and did not spare another glance at the pile of trash on the floor. Clear the room. Richard left those cold words behind. Under the absolute protection of 2 rows of men in black, I stepped over the shattered glass and torn contracts. Walking straight back under the awestruck, trembling gazes of the entire room, I strode out of that nauseating banquet hall. Behind me, only Luke's desperate wails and the frantic flashing of cameras remained. The night wind blew past, lifting the hem of my dress, but it could no longer chill my hardened heart. Samantha, are you still dizzy? Dr. Evans, get the ice packs right now. The heavy car door closed with a solid thud, completely blocking out the noisy shutters of the press and Luke's agonizing screams outside the venue. The back seat of the Rolls-Royce Phantom was spacious and silent, carrying the faint, soothing scent of premium leather and cedar. My father's brows were tightly furrowed. His calloused hands gripped my wrist as he turned and barked at the private physician riding with us. Mr. Sterling, the soft tissue contusion on the young lady's face is quite severe. Thankfully, there is no bone damage. I will apply a cold compress first. Dr. Evans efficiently opened his medical kit, took out a specialized medical ice pack, and carefully placed it over my highly swollen right cheek. The freezing touch seeped through the fabric into my skin, subduing the burning, stinging pain. I leaned back against the soft leather seat, slowly exhaling a breath mixed with the faint taste of blood. Dad, I'm fine. I opened my eyes, looking at this old man whose hair was graying at the temples, but who still erupted in thunderous fury for my sake. A sour, warming sensation swelled in my chest. Do not get so angry over someone like that. It is not worth it. Not worth it? He dared to touch a hair on your head in front of all those people. I will make his entire bloodline pay. Richard slammed his walking stick hard against the floorboard of the car, producing a dull thud. He turned to look at Arthur Hayes sitting in the front passenger seat, his gaze as sharp as a blade. Send the word out. Before midnight tonight, I want a report confirming the complete severance of Vance Innovations' supply chain. And dig deep into the background of that tech project he just secured. Tear it inside out. By the time the sun rises tomorrow, I want to make sure he does not even have a pair of underwear left to his name. Yes, Chairman, the legal and risk management departments are already working overtime. The full takeover and asset freezing protocols are in motion. Arthur nodded respectfully, his fingers flying across the screen of his tablet. I rolled down the window halfway. The cool autumn wind of New York blew into the cabin, scattering my messy hair over my shoulders. Outside, the neon lights blurred into streaks of vibrant color racing backward. There was no agonizing crying, no hysterical screaming over the betrayal. I looked at my swollen but eerily calm face in the rearview mirror, and suddenly felt a profound, unprecedented sense of relief. Over the past 3 years, to preserve that ridiculous facade of a home, I had hidden away all my edge. I wore $20 clearance shirts, cooked hearty meals in a smoke-filled kitchen, and spent countless late nights poring over messy financial spreadsheets to plug the holes in Luke's business. I thought my endurance and compromises would earn his true love and respect. Instead, it earned me his inflated ego after he found success. It earned me 3 brutal slaps to the face while he grabbed my hair in front of a crowd. Whatever feelings I had were ground into dust by his day-after-day nitpicking and disgust. The moment he struck me, the final thread of attachment in my heart shattered into powder. Samantha, what do you plan to do next? Richard looked at me, a hint of inquiry in his eyes. If you do not want to see him ever again, Dad can make him disappear from New York right now. No need. I took a wet wipe from the doctor, meticulously cleaning the grime off my knuckles. My voice was as cold as a block of ice. Making him just disappear is too easy on him. The things Luke cares about most are his painstakingly constructed social status and his wealth. I'm going to make him watch helplessly as he climbs to the very peak, only to step into thin air and plummet into an abyss of no return. What belongs to me, I will make him vomit back up, with interest. Seeing the sheer determination in my eyes, Richard's tense shoulders finally relaxed. He let out a cold snort, a flash of approval in his eyes. That is my daughter. Good. You play this game of chess yourself. Dad will deploy all of Sterling Global's resources for you. I want everyone in New York to know the price of crossing the Sterling family. The Rolls-Royce drove steadily into the depths of the night, leaving that absurd farce far behind. It is all that Chloe's fault. If that little tramp had not been whispering in your ear all day, would you have slapped Samantha in front of all those people? A piercing scream detonated inside the cramped cabin of the Porsche. Barbara tightly gripped the passenger seatbelt. Her normally flawless hair was now a disheveled mess, strands of white hair plastered to her sweaty forehead. She twisted her head around, glaring with a murderous look at the woman in the red dress sitting in the back seat. Mrs. Vance, how can you falsely accuse me like that? Chloe shrank into the corner of the leather seat, clutching her neck where Barbara had just left red scratch marks. Tears streamed down her face like broken pearls. Luke is the one who hit her. And spilling the wine was an accident. How was I supposed to know that quiet loser was actually the heiress to the Sterling family? Weren't you the one calling her a curse every single day? Now that things went wrong, you are pushing all the blame onto me. You shameless homewrecker, you dare talk back to me? Barbara trembled with rage, unbuckling her seatbelt to lunge at the back seat. If you had not seduced my son, our family would be the royal in-laws of the Sterling conglomerate right now. That is a multi-billion-dollar empire. I will kill you, you curse. Enough. Both of you shut up. Luke's eyes were bloodshot, the veins on his forehead bulging. He aggressively slammed his foot on the brake. The tires shrieked violently against the asphalt. The Porsche jerked to a violent halt on the elevated highway in the middle of the night. Barbara's head slammed hard into the dashboard, letting out a wail of pain. Chloe was thrown forward by the massive momentum, crashing into the back of the front seat with a muffled groan. Luke gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Remembering Richard Sterling's ice-cold eyes, remembering the black muzzle of the gun pressed to his temple, he still felt his legs go weak. Layers of cold sweat soaked through his shirt. His proud Vance innovations, his newly signed multi-million-dollar contracts, his carefully crafted image as a young tech prodigy in front of the behemoth that was Sterling Global. It was all as fragile as wet tissue paper, instantly pulverized with a single poke. What are you screaming about? Is your screaming going to make Sterling Global lift their ban? Luke whipped around, his bloodshot eyes glaring at his mother and Chloe like a rabid beast. Who was the one nagging in my ear every day that Samantha was not good enough for me? Who told me to hurry up and find a woman with a strong background to marry? Mom, are you playing the good guy now? You insulted Samantha worse than anyone else. And you. He pointed a trembling finger at Chloe. If you had not caused a scene today, stepping on her dress, why would I have been put in a position where I felt I had to slap her to save face? Do you have any idea what this means? With Sterling pulling their funding, Vance Innovations will face a $50 million deficit by tomorrow morning. If we cannot cover it, we are all going to have to jump off a building. Chloe was terrified by his demonic expression, forgetting even to cry as she desperately pressed herself against the car door. In the face of brutal, realistic financial interests, the faux affection they had maintained was instantly ripped to shreds. The car cabin was filled with suffocating fear and despair. Luke's hands trembled as he fished a cigarette from his pocket and lit it. He took several deep drags before he could somewhat suppress the shivering in his chest. He restarted the car, pressing the gas pedal to the floor, speeding toward his luxurious mansion in Greenwich. All he wanted now was to get home, open his safe, and see exactly how much cash and liquid assets he still had left. However, as the blinding high beams of the Porsche swept across the massive iron gates of his estate, Luke slammed on the brakes. The gates to the mansion were wide open. 2 black SUVs were parked in the driveway. 4 men in suits, holding black briefcases, stood on his front steps, staring expressionlessly at his approaching car. The man leading them wore gold-rimmed glasses, exuding an aura of cold, bureaucratic efficiency. Luke swallowed hard, forcing himself out of the car. Barbara and Chloe also sensed something was wrong and cowered inside the vehicle, afraid to show their faces. Who are you people? What are you doing breaking into my property in the middle of the night? I will call the police, Luke shouted, trying to use false bravado to cover his internal panic. The man with the gold-rimmed glasses pushed them up his nose, pulled a document stamped with a red official seal from his briefcase, and coldly presented it to Luke. Mr. Luke Vance, correct? We are from the Asset Protection Department of Manhattan Commercial Bank. This is a court-ordered asset freeze injunction. Asset freeze? Luke's pupils contracted violently, his voice dropping an octave. Yes. The man's voice was completely flat. Given that your company's largest investor, Sterling Global, officially announced the withdrawal of all credit guarantees and unilaterally terminated cooperation an hour ago, our bank conducted an emergency risk assessment. We determined that Vance Innovations has lost its ability to repay its debts. To secure the $50 million bridge loan our bank issued, a federal judge has granted our request for an asset freeze. Effective immediately, this mansion, along with all high-value assets inside, is officially seized. Please gather your personal belongings and cooperate. Seized? On what grounds are you seizing my house? I bought this mansion with my own money. The mortgage is not even due yet. You are breaching the contract. Luke jumped like a cat whose tail had been stepped on, reaching out to snatch the court order. Two burly security personnel immediately stepped in front of the man in glasses. The man sneered. Mr. Vance, I suggest you carefully read the addendums in your loan agreement. The moment the guarantor withdraws, or a severe operational risk arises, the bank has the right to recall the loan immediately. This is entirely legal. Of course, if you can cover the $50 million shortfall within 3 days, the house will be unsealed. But considering the scale of Sterling Global's blacklist, do you really think there is a single bank in New York willing to lend you a dime? Those words hit Luke's chest like a sledgehammer. He stumbled backward, collapsing onto the cold asphalt driveway. No. You cannot take my house. This is my lifeblood. Barbara scrambled out of the car, throwing herself toward the bank officials. Interfering with a court order or assaulting a bank official will result in an immediate call to the police. The man in glasses glanced coldly at Barbara. She froze in terror, then plopped down onto the ground, slapping her thighs and wailing hysterically. Hiding behind the car door, Chloe's eyes darted around shiftily, her gaze locked dead onto the heavy gold necklace resting around Barbara's neck. Mr. Vance, we apologize, but orders are orders from the top. We are just doing our jobs. Please do not make this harder than it needs to be. The next morning, inside the VIP lounge of Manhattan Commercial Bank's headquarters, the air conditioning was blasting. The branch manager politely but firmly blocked Luke from entering the executive hallway. Luke's eyes were entirely bloodshot, a dark stubble covering his chin. The bespoke suit he had worn to the gala the night before was now deeply wrinkled, his tie pulled crookedly to the side. He desperately grabbed the manager's arm. Mr. Henderson, brother, please just let me through. I just need to see the president for 5 minutes. I still have 2 software patents in development. Just give me a 3-month grace period, no, 1 month. I can definitely gather the funds. Luke's voice was unspeakably hoarse. Mr. Henderson forcefully pried Luke's fingers off his arm, took a step back, and adjusted his suit jacket. Luke, considering we have done business in the past, let me be straight with you, Mr. Henderson lowered his voice. First thing this morning, Sterling Global issued an industry-wide risk alert. You offended the eldest daughter of the Sterling family, who just returned to take control. The absolute mandate from above is that anyone who catches your falling knife is making an enemy out of the entire Sterling conglomerate. Do you really think the bank president is going to risk the bank's entire foundation just to save your $50 million loan? Get out of here before I have security throw you out. With that, Mr. Henderson turned and walked away. Luke stood frozen in place, feeling the cold air radiating from the polished marble floor of the lobby. He stumbled out of the bank doors. The morning autumn sun was glaring, shining brightly on the busy Manhattan streets. He sat on the edge of a concrete planter, his hands trembling as he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. He called Mr. Pierce, the largest hardware supplier in the tri-state area. Sorry, the number you have dialed is currently busy. They had blocked him. Luke gritted his teeth and dialed Mr. Gallagher, the venture capitalist who always called him a brother. Hello, Mr. Gallagher, it's Luke. Brother, I have run into some trouble. Do you think you could lend me $10 million to tide me over? Oh, Luke, my man. I'm so sorry, the voice on the other end laughed awkwardly. Money is tight for me right now, too. All my capital is tied up in a massive project. I just flew to Europe for a site visit yesterday. Won't be back for months. Gotta go. Dial tone. He refused to give up, dialing number after number. Mr. Davis, about a loan. Oh, bad timing. Mr. Smith, it's Luke. Luke, you jinx. Stay the hell away from me. If you want to die, do not drag me down with you. After making over 40 calls, he received nothing but excuses. Feigned ignorance, cold mockery, or outright curses. His phone grew hot from constant use until the battery finally died, the screen fading to black. Luke buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking violently. The corporate titans who had surrounded him out of mutual self-interest had turned on him with terrifying speed. The tech empire he was so proud of had collapsed into dust before Sterling Global. The sun beat down on him, but Luke only felt freezing cold. He abruptly raised his head, his bloodshot eyes staring fixedly at a massive digital billboard across Times Square. It was broadcasting Sterling Global's latest executive appointment, Samantha Sterling, officially named CEO of Sterling Global North America. The woman on the screen wore a razor-sharp white power suit, her gaze icy. Not a trace remained of the wife who used to wash clothes and cook in a cramped kitchen. Samantha. Samantha. Luke ground his teeth, a low growl tearing from his throat. Just then, a strange number called the burner phone he had just plugged into a portable charger. Luke quickly answered. Luke Vance, right? A rough, mob-like voice came through. This is Razor Ray from South Bronx Capital. I hear you are running around looking for cash. What is the matter? Hit a dead end? Luke's heart skipped a beat. South Bronx Capital was a notorious loan shark syndicate in New York. But right now, he had no other choice. Ray, how much can you lend me? Luke asked dryly, his voice echoing the crazed desperation of a gambler at the end of his rope. As long as you have collateral, I will give you whatever you need. The laughter on the other end was bone-chilling. Luke gripped his phone tightly, staring at the rushing traffic, a suicidal resolve flashing in his eyes. Miss Sterling, Luke Vance has been kneeling outside the lobby for 3 hours. He says he will not get up until he sees you. My assistant, Liam, handed me a tablet with both hands. The screen displayed the live security feed from the plaza outside Sterling Global's headquarters. Outside, a torrential downpour was falling. Heavy raindrops smashed relentlessly against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my 28th floor penthouse office, leaving winding trails of water. On the screen, Luke, wearing his soaking, wet, wrinkled suit plastered to his body, was kneeling completely upright in the center of the flooded plaza. His hair was a matted mess, wet strands clinging to his pale forehead as he shivered in the violent storm. Around the plaza, employees and pedestrians holding umbrellas had stopped to watch, pointing and whispering. Even through the screen, one could feel the piercing disdain. Yet, he did not fly into a rage and chase them away as he usually would. He merely stared fixedly at the revolving glass doors of the Sterling building, his hands clutching the wet fabric at his knees, as if waiting for some illusory salvation. I stood behind my expansive mahogany desk, kept at a comfortable 72 degrees. I lifted a vintage porcelain cup and took a sip of black coffee. The rich, bitter aroma filled my nasal cavity, settling any emotional fluctuations. It is raining quite hard, I said softly, shifting my gaze from the tablet to the gray sky outside. New York had not seen an autumn storm like this in a long time. Should I have security forcefully remove him? It is a bad look to have him kneeling outside our front doors. The media outside are already drafting articles, Liam asked quietly, probing for my intentions. No need. I set the porcelain cup down on the wooden desk with a soft clink. If he wants to kneel, let him kneel. This is a man who values his pride over his life. When he started his company, he would rather spend 20 grand he did not have to treat clients to dinner to look wealthy than lower his head to ask for an extension on his bills. The fact that he can kneel in public for 3 hours means whatever leverage he had left has completely rotted away. Looking at the pathetic man on the screen, my mind held no manic joy of revenge, only the crystal clarity of a surgeon removing a tumor. Once upon a time, when he ran a 102-degree fever and refused to go to the hospital to save money, I ran through a winter blizzard across 3 avenues to buy him medicine. When I returned, I stood in the cramped kitchen of our tiny Brooklyn apartment for 4 hours making him chicken soup. He had leaned against the headboard, holding my hand with red eyes, saying, "Samantha, when I get through this, I promise you will live in the biggest mansion in New York. You will be the happiest woman in the world." He lied so much that even he believed it. But when he actually moved into a mansion, when his net worth hit millions, what he gave me were vicious slaps to the face and public humiliation that shattered my dignity. Whatever feelings I had for him died in those days of relentless nitpicking, neglect, and betrayal. I gave him countless chances to pull back from the edge, but he insisted on crushing my bottom line. "Liam, tell Attorney Davis from the legal department to come up." I turned, walked to my desk, and unlocked a fingerprint-secured drawer. I pulled out a sealed manila envelope that had been locked away for a long time. "Take the $30 million personal loan contract I injected into Vance Innovations 3 years ago and initiate legal proceedings." Tell Attorney Davis not to bother with a warning letter. File the lawsuit directly with the Federal District Court, and file for prejudgment asset attachment. Before the sun sets today, I want to see every remaining liquid and fixed asset under Vance Innovations sealed with court tape. Liam's hand paused slightly as he took the envelope. Then he immediately straightened his posture. Understood, Miss Sterling. Attorney Davis's team has been on standby for 2 days. The chain of evidence is airtight. Once the filing is submitted, the court will issue the attachment order within 2 hours. I nodded, looking back at the tablet. Luke seemed to lose his strength, his body swaying violently. He had to plant one hand on the flooded pavement to stabilize himself. I extended a finger and coldly pressed the lock screen button. Luke Vance, 3 years ago, I used this $30 million to pull you out from the dead. 3 years later, I will use this exact same contract to send you straight to hell. Since you like kneeling so much, you can take your pathetic regrets and kneel all the way to bankruptcy court. Luke is finished. I'm not playing this game with you anymore. Inside the dimly lit Vance mansion, the heavy blackout curtains were drawn tight. Thunder rumbled outside, the pale flashes of lightning occasionally piercing through the gaps, illuminating the catastrophic mess inside. Expensive Persian rugs were littered with smashed porcelain, shredded ledgers, and overturned ashtrays. Chloe, barefoot and clutching a limited edition Hermes Birkin bag, was frantically rummaging through the master bedroom's walk-in closet like an oversized rat with a sharp nose. She yanked open the jewelry drawer, sweeping up the Cartier bracelets, Bulgari necklaces, and 2 gold Rolexes that originally belonged to me but had been claimed by her. She shoved them all into her bag. After that, she turned to the bottom drawer of the nightstand, pulling out heavy gold bars and stacks of unopened cash. Looking at her rapidly expanding wealth, a greedy smile finally broke through the terror on her pale face. The disaster at the gala had completely shattered her dream of marrying into high society. All day today, watching Luke run around like a mad dog begging for money, watching bank officials slap seizure notices on the property, she knew this sinking ship was going under. She was only 25. With her looks and this stolen wealth, she could flee to another state, change her identity, and easily hook another rich man. There was absolutely no way she was staying to take on debt with a loser like Luke. What do you think you are doing? A shrill, piercing scream suddenly detonated at the bedroom door. Chloe jumped, dropping a gold bar onto the floor with a loud clatter. She whipped around to see Barbara standing in the doorway. The old woman's hair was wild, her eyes sunken, her bloodshot eyes locked dead onto the Hermes bag in Chloe's arms. In the flash of lightning, Barbara saw the corner of a gold bar peeking out of the bag. You shameless thief. You little slut. The Vance family is not dead yet, and you are stealing from our house? Barbara lunged forward like a rabid lioness, grabbing a handful of Chloe's hair. Ah, let go of me, you old hag. Chloe screamed in pain, trying to push Barbara away, but the old woman's instinct to protect her wealth gave her terrifying strength. She yanked Chloe's hair backward while her other hand clawed madly at the bag filled with jewelry. This is my family's money. This is my son's lifeblood. You curse. You made my son offend the Sterling family, and now you want to take the money and run? I will kill you. Barbara cursed as she raised her hand and slapped Chloe fiercely across the face. The sharp smack echoed in the empty bedroom, leaving 5 distinct red marks on Chloe's cheek. That strike ignited all the resentment Chloe had repressed all day. Do you still think you are some high and mighty CEO's mother? Chloe let go with one hand and violently shoved Barbara, sending her stumbling backward. Your son is a debt-ridden loser now. He probably will not even survive this. This jewelry was bought for me. It is my emotional compensation. Get out of my way. Bullshit. That was the bridal gift I bought for Samantha. You shameless homewreckers stole it from her. Give it back to me. Barbara steadied herself and lunged again. The two rolled onto the expensive hardwood floor in a brawl. Stripped of their designer clothes and the aura of wealth, these two women, who had aligned purely for profit, now displayed the ugliest, most primal animalistic behavior. Chloe's nails dug into Barbara's face, leaving bloody scratch marks. Barbara bit down hard on Chloe's wrist. They cursed and tore at each other's clothing. Reap. Under the violent pulling, the seams of the incredibly expensive Hermes Birkin bag finally gave way. Crash. Gold bars, designer watches, pearl necklaces, and stacks of $100 bills spilled out like a broken dam, scattering across the floor. The golden glint was exceptionally blinding in the dark room. My money. My gold. Barbara's eyes went completely red. Ignoring Chloe, she scrambled on her hands and knees to gather the gold bars, hugging them tightly to her chest, her face covered in tears and snot. Chloe took the opportunity to break free. Panting heavily, she adjusted her torn collar. She knew that if Luke came back, she would not be able to take anything. Gritting her teeth, she snatched 2 Rolex watches and a handful of cash from the floor, shoved them into her purse, and kicked a chair blocking the door out of the way. "You crazy old bat, you can stay in this broken house and wait to die with your loser son." Chloe threw out a vicious curse, didn't look back, and sprinted down the stairs in her high heels, disappearing into the stormy night. Barbara sat paralyzed amid the mess, clutching a few gold bars. Listening to the deafening thunder outside, she finally broke down into a hysterical, agonizing wail. "Ray, Mr. Pierce, please, just give me an extension. Just 3 more days. I have a software patent in my name. Once I sell it, I can definitely cover the interest I owe you." Luke dragged his legs, which felt like they were filled with lead, and pushed open the front doors of his mansion. Before he could even wipe the rainwater dripping from his hair, he was already bowing repeatedly to the men sitting on his living room sofa. The spacious living room reeked of cheap tobacco. Several heavily tattooed, muscular thugs were sprawled across the $1 million imported Italian leather sofa. The bald man leading them, Razor Ray, was a notoriously ruthless figure in New York's underground lending scene. Ray had a cigar clamped in his mouth. The muddy water from his boots was unapologetically smeared across the expensive rug. He looked coldly at the soaking wet Luke, who resembled a stray dog, and let out a disdainful snort. "An extension? Mr. Vance, you have been in the business world for years. Have you forgotten the basic rules?" Ray pulled the cigar from his mouth and casually crushed it out on the expensive mahogany coffee table, leaving a scorched black burn mark. "You borrowed $20 million from our firm using Vance Innovations equity as collateral. Now that Sterling Global has blacklisted you, your company's stock is not even worth toilet paper on the black market. You are underwater. How the hell are you going to pay me back?" Ray stood up abruptly, grabbed Luke by the collar, and slammed him hard against the wall. Ray, trust me, I still have." Luke's face turned purple as he struggled. "You have shit." Ray turned and snatched a document from one of his men, violently slapping it against Luke's face. The stiff edge of the paper cut Luke's cheek, leaving a red mark. The papers scattered onto the floor. The bright red seal of the Federal District Court burned Luke's eyes. It was a pre-judgment order of attachment. On the applicant line, 2 cold words were printed. Samantha Sterling. Amount, $30 million. "See that?" Ray patted Luke's pale cheek, a mocking smile on his face. "That ex-wife of yours is more ruthless than loan sharks. She took the contract for that lifeline money she lent you 3 years ago straight to the courts. Now, not only the bank, but the courts are seizing this house. Your cars, your properties, even the last few bucks in your checking account have been frozen." Luke stared at Samantha's name on the document. His brain roared. He remembered begging in the rain just 3 hours ago. All along, while that woman looked down at him from her high tower, she had effortlessly pressed the final button to annihilate him. A $30 million personal debt, plus a $50 million bank bridge loan, plus Ray's $20 million high-interest loan. $100 million in the hole. Luke slid slowly down the wall until he sat on the floor, his eyes as hollow as a soulless puppet. "All right, quit playing dead. The feds are about to put tape on this door. My boys are not leaving empty-handed." Ray waved his hand. "Boys, grab anything of value in this house. Antiques, paintings, electronics, furniture. Load it all up." The tattooed thugs immediately went to work. They roughly tore expensive paintings off the walls, tossing them into duffel bags. They kicked open the pantry and hauled out cases of vintage wine. They even took unopened high-end cookware from the kitchen. "No, you cannot take that. That is mine." Hearing the commotion, Barbara came tumbling down the stairs, still clutching those gold bars. One of the thugs easily grabbed Barbara's wrist and twisted it. She shrieked in pain, dropping the gold bars with a clatter. The thug picked them up, wiped them on his shirt, and pocketed them. "Mom." Luke's eyes practically bulged out of his head. He tried to rush forward to fight, but 2 thugs immediately pinned him to the floor. Ray walked over to Luke, his eyes falling on the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist. He crouched down, forcibly unbuckled the strap, and shoved the watch into his own pocket. "Mr. Vance, this junk barely covers the interest." Ray patted Luke's shoulder. "You figure out how to pay back the principal yourself. But a warning, with Sterling's blacklist, no one in New York will let you earn a dime. We will be watching you." Even if you have to dig through the trash for the rest of your life, you are going to pay back what you owe us." With a wave of his hand, Ray and his men walked out of the mansion carrying bags of collateral. The empty living room was left with nothing but broken tables and trash. Cold wind blew through the open doors, making the curtains flap wildly. Luke lay on the floor, staring at the court order, emitting a bizarre choking sound from his throat that was a mix of laughing and crying. He finally realized that what he had personally torn apart was not a weak, submissive wife, but an inescapable net of absolute power, capable of grinding him into dust. Tape it up. Align the left side. Press it down hard so the rain does not wash it off. Two court-marshals in windbreakers expressionlessly pulled a stretch of white tape, with adhesive backing across the heavy brass doors of the Vance mansion. The red federal seal was painfully bright against the dreary rain. "Mr. Vance, pursuant to the court order, this property is officially seized. Anyone breaking the seal, tampering with the locks, or moving remaining assets will face federal criminal charges." The marshal handed a receipt form to Luke and tapped his pen on the paper. "Sign here to acknowledge." Luke stood rigidly at the bottom of the porch steps. The freezing autumn rain washed through his matted hair and down his neck, but he seemed to have lost all sensation. He took the pen with trembling hands and scratched his signature onto the paper. It was so broken and disjointed it was barely legible. "All right, let's move out." The marshal took the form, popped open a black umbrella, and led his officers to the cruisers parked outside. The rain grew heavier. A cheap, mud-splattered moving truck smelling of diesel backed into the massive driveway that was once reserved for supercars. Several movers in worn raincoats hopped out, roughly tossing Luke and Barbara's cheap woven bags into the flooded back of the truck. "Hey, careful. Don't throw them so hard. Those are my son's designer clothes. If you ruin them, you cannot afford to pay for them." Barbara, wearing a wrinkled old coat, clutched a rice cooker wrapped tightly in newspaper, screaming at the movers. "Lady, you paid us $200 total. Stop complaining. A thrift store wouldn't even take these rags, let alone call them designer." The lead mover spat on the ground, completely unapologetic. Barbara shook with rage. She turned to push Luke, who was standing frozen in the rain. "Luke, you are just going to stand there and let these lowlifes bully your mother? You used to boss around thousands of employees? Show some authority?" Luke's eyes shifted slowly. He did not look at his mother. Instead, he stared fixedly at the open wrought iron gates at the end of the driveway. Normally, this highly secure Greenwich neighborhood was strictly off-limits. Now, the gates were wide open, turning his home into a free spectacle for the public. A dozen colorful umbrellas were gathered outside. His wealthy neighbors, people he used to golf and have cocktails with, were pointing and gossiping through the iron bars. "See that? That is Luke Vance of Vance Innovations. Acting like he owned the world at the gala a few days ago, and now his house is seized. I heard he was keeping a mistress and slapped his wife in public. Turns out his wife was the heiress to the Sterling family. Sterling crushed him like a bug. Bankrupt and owing millions to the mob. Serves him right. I always hated his arrogant new money attitude anyway. Good riddance. Having a deadbeat like him in our neighborhood lowers property values." The people who used to smile and call them Mr. Vance and Mrs. Vance were now driving toxic needles right into his spine. "Stop filming. What are you looking at? Get out. All of you get out." Barbara dropped her rice cooker and charged at the iron gates, flailing her arms, trying to block the neighbors who had their phones out recording. "Mom, enough. Have you not embarrassed us enough?" Luke suddenly let out a beast-like roar. He rushed forward, violently grabbed Barbara's arm, and dragged her toward a beat-up yellow cab idling on the street. "My rice cooker. Luke, we forgot it. Leave it. Leave everything. Get in." Luke shoved Barbara into the back of the cab, which reeked of cheap cologne and stale smoke, and threw himself in after her. The door slammed shut, blocking out the mockery and the rain, but it could not block the despair that was rapidly consuming his sanity. The cab drove out of the luxury neighborhood, heading toward the most run-down, dilapidated section of the South Bronx. That was where he lived when he first started his company. Damp, freezing, and starved of sunlight. Now it was the only place he could afford to shelter in. He leaned against the stained seat, covering his face with both hands, his shoulders convulsing violently. The doors to wealth, which had briefly opened for him, were now permanently sealed shut. Miss Sterling, tonight at 8:00 p.m., there is an internal networking event at the Velvet Room, hosted by the Tri-State Chamber of Commerce. The key suppliers for the new international hardware project are attending. Mr. Gallagher and Mr. Gallagher. Pierce set it up. They want to iron out the details of the project Sterling just took over. The Maybach cruised smoothly over the illuminated Brooklyn Bridge. My assistant, Liam, sat in the passenger seat, reading clearly from the itinerary. I leaned back in the aviation-grade leather seat, scrolling through the supplier background checks on my iPad. Tell Mr. Pierce that the schmoozing can be skipped. I only care about their capacity evaluation reports and risk management metrics. If they do not meet Sterling's standard protocols, I do not care how deeply tied they used to be with Vance Innovations. Cut them all loose. Understood. I have already communicated your boundaries to them. These executives are completely terrified of you right now. Liam smiled and closed his folder. At 8:30 p.m., inside the VIP suite of the Velvet Room, the heavy soundproof doors were respectfully pushed open by a waiter. Inside, a brilliant crystal chandelier cast a soft glow. The scent of expensive Cuban cigars mixed with vintage red wine floated in the air. Over a dozen Manhattan business titans, who had been laughing and chatting on leather sofas, extinguished their cigars in unison the second I stepped into the room. They all stood up, their faces plastered with ingratiating, awe-struck smiles. Miss Sterling, your presence is an honor. Thank you for coming. Mr. Gallagher, the host, strode forward with a wine glass, bending slightly at the waist, his posture incredibly deferential. Mr. Gallagher, you are too kind. Traffic was a bit heavy. Apologies for keeping you waiting. I handed my bespoke trench coat to the bodyguard behind me and, in my stiletto heels, walked straight to the center seat of honor. Only after I sat down did the others dare to take their seats. The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted from relaxed to a tense, probing tightness. Miss Sterling, regarding the manufacturing orders for the international project. Mr. Gallagher began to cut to the chase. The suite doors opened again. Gentlemen, apologies for the interruption. The Romani Conti you ordered has arrived. Let me decant it for you. The club manager led a few scantily clad waitresses carrying trays into the room. The manager expertly opened the bottle and ordered the girls to kneel on the rug, using the most submissive posture to pour wine for the VIPs. One of the girls, holding a crystal decanter and keeping her head bowed, shuffled forward on her knees until she was at my feet. She wore a tight mini dress that barely covered anything and heavy, cheap club makeup. Keeping her head down, she raised the decanter to pour the wine into the glass in front of me. Suddenly, she seemed to notice something. Her gaze traveled up my limited edition Jimmy Choo heels, slowly moving higher, until it locked onto my face. Clang. The expensive decanter slipped from her hands and shattered. The crimson wine splashed all over the costly rug, glass shards flying everywhere. The girl stared at me as if she had seen a ghost, her eyes wide, all the color draining from her face in an instant. It was Chloe, the woman who had proudly held Luke's arm at the gala, spilled wine on my old dress, and mocked me for being a housewife only fit to wash vegetables. After fleeing with the last of the Vance family's cash and jewelry, it took only a few days for her to be scammed out of everything by a grifter pretending to be a trust fund kid. Left with nothing but massive predatory payday loans, she was forced into this underground club, selling her body and dignity for meager commissions to survive. What the hell are you doing? Are you blind? The club manager was scared out of his wits. He rushed forward and kicked Chloe hard in the back. If you stain Miss Sterling's clothes, selling your organs wouldn't be enough to pay for it. Chloe fell onto the glass-covered rug. Her palms were sliced open, blood mixing with the wine, but she seemed not to feel the pain. She just stared blankly at me, sitting in the center of the room surrounded by the city's elite. Samantha, Samantha, she forced out in a raspy, broken voice. The room went dead silent. The executives acutely sensed the bizarre tension. No one dared to speak, only shifting their probing gazes between the two of us. I sat upright on the leather sofa, my expression completely unchanged. I looked at her messy hair, her cheap makeup, and the uniform reeking of cheap perfume, as if looking at a piece of worthless trash. Chloe suddenly snapped out of it. Ignoring her bleeding hands, she scrambled to my feet and desperately grabbed my calves. Miss Sterling. Miss Sterling. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. Chloe sobbed hysterically, her heavy eyeliner running and looking like two ridiculous smears of black mud. It was all that bastard Luke who forced me. He lied and said you were a nobody. He told me to bully you. Please, you are the bigger person, let me go. The manager forces me to drink hard liquor with clients every day. If I do not pay back my loans, they are going to kill me. Please, save me. She smashed her forehead against the glass shards on the floor, begging for a tiny bit of cheap sympathy. I coldly lowered my eyes, watching her bloody fingers trying to grip the hem of my skirt. "Let go," I spat out 2 words. The volume was low, but it carried a terrifyingly oppressive weight. Chloe shuddered violently and instinctively let go. I elegantly moved my heel away, pulled a wet wipe from the table, and methodically wiped the fabric of my dress where she had touched it. I tossed the wipe accurately into the trash can. I looked up, sweeping my gaze over the trembling manager, my tone freezing. I do not like having unclean things ruining my mood when discussing business. Since when did the standards at the Velvet Room drop this low? Cold sweat soaked through the manager's shirt. He fully understood the weight of that statement. With one word from Sterling Global, not only would this girl disappear, but this highly profitable club would be wiped out of New York by tomorrow. "I'm so sorry, Miss Sterling. It is my fault. Security, are you dead? Drag this crazy bitch out of here right now." The manager screamed hysterically at the door. 2 massive bouncers rushed in, grabbing Chloe by the arms and dragging her out like a dead dog. "Samantha, rot in hell. Just because you have money, you think you can trample on people? I curse you." Knowing she was completely finished, Chloe erupted into sharp, venomous screams. The manager rushed forward, slapping her violently across the face twice, shutting her up instantly. "Gag her. Throw her in the back alley storage room. Call the debt collectors to come pick her up," he ordered through gritted teeth. The cursing faded away. The suite doors closed again. I picked up the freshly poured glass of red wine, gently swirling it. The red liquid left grim trails on the crystal glass. "Mr. Gallagher, apologies for the spectacle. Let us continue discussing the production capacity for the manufacturing orders," I said, lifting my eyes with a faint smile, acting as if I had just crushed an insignificant fly. The executives looked at each other, quickly raising their glasses, the awe in their faces even deeper than before. They clearly saw the cold-blooded ruthlessness of this young female CEO. At 1:00 a.m., the networking event concluded. The Maybach dropped me off at the highest security luxury condo building in downtown Manhattan. I had moved into this penthouse after taking over the company. The underground garage had a private, exclusive section for penthouse owners. "Miss Sterling, do you need an escort upstairs?" the head of my security detail asked respectfully from outside the car. "No need. You have all worked hard today. Head home and get some rest." I grabbed my handbag and walked alone toward my private elevator. The garage lighting was somewhat dim, the air carrying a faint smell of exhaust. My heels clicked sharply and rhythmically against the epoxy floor. Just as I was less than 30 feet from the elevator, a strong, pungent stench of cheap alcohol and unwashed body odor hit me. From behind a massive concrete pillar near the elevator, a dark shadow lunged out. "Samantha." It was a blood-curdling shriek, full of endless, venomous hatred and madness. Luke looked like a zombie crawling out of a grave. He was wearing the same suit, now soaked in mud and vomit. His hair was matted, his eyes so bloodshot they looked like they were bleeding. His cheekbones jutted out, his body severely emaciated. All human sanity was gone from his eyes, replaced only by the madness of a gambler who had lost everything and wanted to drag the world to hell with him. In his right hand, he tightly gripped a rusted but razor-sharp hunting knife. The fluorescent lights flickered. The blade caught the cold light, reflecting a terrifying, chilling gleam. "It was you. You ruined me. You bankrupted my company. You had the courts take my house. You forced my mother to eat out of the garbage." Luke roared hysterically. Spit flying from his mouth, his face twisted in extreme hatred. "You bitch. You destroyed every path I had to survive. Even if I die today, I'm taking you to hell with me." Before the words even faded, he raised the hunting knife. Driven by alcohol and adrenaline, he lunged at my chest like a rabid dog. The tip of the blade pierced the heavy air, bringing the howl of death right before my eyes. The blade, stained with unknown dark grime, gleamed under the dying fluorescent light. Luke was completely stripped of his humanity. The hair that was once perfectly styled with expensive pomade was now a rat's nest. His bespoke Italian suit was torn and caked with filth. "Go to hell with me." He forced a broken, raspy roar from his throat. The stench of cheap liquor washed over me like a rotting swamp. No screams, no flinching. My breathing rate did not alter by a single fraction. I stood perfectly still on the epoxy floor. The hem of my custom trench coat fluttered slightly from the wind of his lunge. Through the short distance, I looked at his desperate madness with the cold detachment of watching a poorly acted play. Since the day the bank seized his house and the loan sharks chased him onto the street, I knew that with his arrogant, narcissistic personality never capable of blaming himself, he would inevitably channel all his rage at the person who shattered his illusion. It was only a matter of time before he came for me. Just as the tip of the knife was half an inch from the buttons of my coat, and a manic smile had already formed on Luke's lips, thinking he had succeeded. Bang! A bone-jarring impact echoed through the dark garage, drowning out the hum of the ventilation system. A shadow, agile as a black panther, exploded from the blind spot behind a pillar to my right. It was a top-tier former Navy SEAL bodyguard hired by Sterling Global. He did not even need to draw his weapon. With a textbook tactical sidekick, his combat boot struck Luke's knife-wielding wrist with devastating force. Crack. The crisp sound of bone snapping was exceptionally clear in the silence. Ah. Luke let out a blood-curdling scream. The hunting knife flew from his hand, clattering heavily onto the concrete and sliding into the storm drain. This was only the beginning of his destruction. Before Luke could even clutch his mangled wrist, 2 more elite bodyguards emerged like ghosts from the shadows. Their movements were devoid of flashiness, only lethal efficiency. "Stay down," the security chief barked. His massive arm grabbed the back of Luke's collar, executing a violent judo throw. Luke's malnourished, alcohol-poisoned body hit the hard epoxy floor with a sickening thud, folding like a sack of trash. Instantly, the 2 guards pinned him down, driving their knees into his spine and the backs of his legs. Luke's face was smashed against the rough concrete, tearing off a layer of skin. Blood immediately oozed out, mixing with the dirt. Click, click. Cold, heavy steel handcuffs were snapped onto Luke's good left wrist, and his shattered right one, ratcheted tight without mercy. The entire process, from Luke's ambush to his total subjugation, took less than 5 seconds. I looked down at the diamond-encrusted face of my watch. The hands pointed exactly to 1:15 a.m. I finally took a step forward. My heels clicked against the concrete. I stopped until the tip of my shoe was less than 4 inches from his bloody, dirt-caked face. "Samantha, you set me up. You knew I was coming. You venomous bitch, you lured me out." Luke thrashed violently like a fish pinned to a cutting board, every movement aggravating his shattered wrist. But he still glared at my shoe with eyes full of pure venom, screaming in a broken voice. "Set you up?" I lowered my eyes, looking down at the man I had once loved, supported, and who eventually trampled me. My voice was soft but piercingly cold. "Luke, do you still not get it? Dealing with a gambler whose cards are entirely predictable does not require a setup." I leaned forward slightly, forcing him to see the abyss in my eyes. "Your company was seized. Your accounts frozen. Ray's men watched you like dogs. You did not even have money for ramen. With your pathetic ego, your only outlet when backed into a corner was to try and take me down with you. Your movements, the hardware store where you bought that knife, and every second you spent hiding behind that pillar for 3 hours were all monitored by Sterling Global's security network." I stood back up, pointing a slender finger toward the 4 corners of the ceiling. Hidden inside smoke detectors, high-definition infrared cameras blinked with faint red lights. The security system here was upgraded to the highest defense tier 3 days ago. 360-degree coverage, complete with high-frequency audio recording. I watched his spine go stiff as I hammered the icy reality into his bones. Your lunge with the knife, and you screaming, "I'm taking you to hell with me," every word, every action, was just live-streamed in 4K directly to the Sterling Legal Department's cloud servers. Luke's pupils shrank to pinpricks. He stared at the red lights on the ceiling as if looking at an executioner's warrant. The madness and hatred in his eyes were extinguished instantly, as if a bucket of ice water had been dumped over his head. Taking its place was true, bone-deep terror. "What do you want?" His voice trembled uncontrollably, his teeth chattering. "What do I want?" I let out a clear laugh that echoed in the empty garage. "Luke, did you really think I would be like some brainless, scorned woman, stabbing you back in an alley? My life is worth 10,000 times yours. You are not worth dirtying my hands." I took a half step back, creating distance from his nauseating presence. "This sharpened knife, your clear homicidal motive, and this perfect security footage, my legal team will hand it all directly to the NYPD tomorrow morning. Attempted murder, with ironclad witnesses and physical evidence. Couple that with your pending charges for corporate fraud and malicious asset concealment." I clinically dictated his future. If you do not spend the next 20 years stamping license plates in a federal penitentiary, it would be an insult to the effort you put into tonight's ambush. Boom. Luke's mind exploded. He finally realized his impulsive attack did not harm me in the slightest. Instead, he had personally delivered the final nail into the coffin of his freedom. Debt he could hide from. Eviction meant renting a basement. But going to prison meant decades behind high walls, completely crushing whatever dignity he had left as a human being. No. Samantha, I was wrong. I was so wrong. His psychological defenses collapsed. Ignoring the agonizing pain in his wrist, Luke frantically tried to lift his head to rub his bloody face against my heel. Tears and snot smeared across his face. He looked pitiful and repulsive. I was drunk. I have alcohol poisoning. I was not thinking straight. I didn't mean to kill you. I just wanted to scare you. He babbled incoherently, his voice breaking into a hysterical sob. Samantha, for the sake of our 3 years of marriage, please spare me. Do not call the cops. I will leave New York tomorrow. I swear on my life I will never appear in front of you again. Please leave me a way out. A way out is something you walk yourself. You chose the dead end. I looked at his pathetic groveling without a single ripple of emotion. My revenge was never about extracting a worthless apology. It was to make him pay the ultimate, irreversible physical and social price for crossing the line. I did not orchestrate this just to push him off a cliff, but when he chose to pick up the knife, I simply used the momentum to close the net legally. Woo-woo. Piercing police sirens suddenly shattered the silence of the Manhattan night. The flashing red and blue lights sliced through the darkness at the garage entrance, approaching rapidly. The security chief had pressed the direct-to-precinct panic button the second he took Luke down. The cops are here. No, I'm not going to prison. Samantha, save me. Hearing the sirens, Luke convulsed as if he had been electrocuted, shrieking like a slaughtered pig. I ignored the pile of garbage on the floor. I elegantly turned around, pulled my trench coat tight, and left the agonizing screams behind me. Hand him over to the NYPD. Tell the lawyers to follow up on the statements and the chain of evidence. I want absolutely zero chance of bail, I ordered the security chief flatly. My heels clicked as I walked toward my private elevator. The doors slowly slid shut, permanently locking that miserable man and that rotten 3-year marriage out of my world forever. 3 days later, Rikers Island Pre-Trial Detention Center. The air in the visitation room was stifling, smelling of disinfectant and rusted iron bars. Glaring white fluorescent lights beat down, illuminating the thick, scratched bulletproof glass that divided this small space into 2 entirely different worlds. I sat perfectly straight in the visitor's chair, wearing a sharp, flawless black suit. My hands were folded neatly in my lap. In front of me sat a freshly printed divorce agreement drawn up by Sterling's legal department, still smelling faintly of ink. The heavy iron door was roughly pushed open, accompanied by the dull clanking of metal shackles dragging against the floor. Luke was escorted out by 2 corrections officers. It had been less than 72 hours, but he looked as if he had aged 10 years. He wore an oversized orange jumpsuit with an inmate number printed across his chest. His thick hair had been forcibly shaved into a buzz cut. His cheeks were hollowed out, his cheekbones protruding, dark circles bruising his eyes. His gaze was vacant and dull. Heavy shackles bound his wrists and ankles, clinking with every sluggish step like a man walking to his execution. He sat down in the chair opposite me. Through the thick glass, his lips moved, trying to force out an ingratiating smile, but it pulled at the scabs on his face, twisting into a grotesque grimace. The guard expressionlessly handed him the visitation phone receiver and stepped back. I picked up the receiver on my side and held it to my ear. Sign it. I offered no greetings. I didn't even look at him. My voice transmitted through the cheap speaker, carrying a cold, businesslike tone. Attorney Davis gave the agreement to your guard. Read it. If there are no issues, sign your name on the last page. Luke's hand holding the phone trembled violently, his knuckles turning white. He stared through the glass at the document in front of me, his eyes slowly turning red. According to the agreement, due to his attempted murder and multiple counts of corporate fraud, he was the strictly at-fault party. Furthermore, after Sterling Global cut off funding, Vance Innovations officially entered Chapter 11 bankruptcy liquidation. The Greenwich Mansion and the luxury cars had been auctioned off yesterday to fill the $50 million hole owed to the bank. As for Ray's $20 million loan shark debt, because there was no legal collateral, It had become a dead debt that would attach to him like a leech. Even while he spent the next few decades stamping license plates for pennies a day, his wages would be garnished to pay it off. He was not just leaving with nothing. He was walking into the abyss saddled with a massive debt he could never repay in this lifetime. Samantha. Luke's voice rasped through the speaker like sandpaper. Did you really have to go this far? Did you have to push me into a dead end? You didn't leave me a single way out? A way out? I retorted with a sneer, finally letting my gaze land on his face. Luke, the debts in your name were signed by your own endless greed. The prison sentence hanging over you is the result of you charging at me with a knife. I simply took back the resources that never belonged to you in the first place. Every step that led you here, you took yourself. Luke choked, his chest heaving violently. He suddenly pressed his face against the bulletproof glass, tears sliding down his face and dripping onto the rough fabric of his jumpsuit. Samantha, look at me. Look at what a monster I have become. He pounded the glass, desperately trying to awaken whatever trace of softness might remain in me. I know I'm a bastard. Money blinded me. But we had good days, didn't we? Remember our first winter married? The heater in that apartment was broken. I had a high fever, and you took the last few $100 we had to buy me medicine. I held you and swore I would make sure you lived in a mansion and wore designer clothes. Was all of that fake? Do you really have no feelings left for me at all? He tried to emotionally blackmail me with memories of our poor but supposedly pure past, trying to prove my current coldness was just a temporary fit of anger. I listened quietly to his tearful accusations, my eyes not rippling in the slightest. The past was real, of course, I stated flatly, my voice as calm as if discussing a stranger's story. Back then, I was willing to hide things from my father, take off my $10,000 bespoke dresses, wear $20 shirts, and suffer in that rundown apartment with you because I believed your heart was genuine. I endured, I compromised, I even learned to cook for you all to protect our little family. I paused, watching a glimmer of hope rise in his eyes, before brutally crushing it to dust. But did you forget? Genuine love is a consumable resource, and it has a bottom line. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze piercing into his soul like a blade. When your company got its first round of funding, and you started complaining that I lacked the elegance of a socialite, when you wanted to suck up to a client and allowed that woman Chloe to pour wine on me in public, when you grabbed my hair and slapped me 3 times at a billionaire's gala just to show off to your fake friends, from that moment on, whatever we had was dead and buried. I did not speak quickly, but every word struck Luke's nerves like a hammer. I didn't suddenly stop loving you, Luke. The disappointment just reached its absolute limit. Those 3 slaps just rang the death knell for our disgusting marriage. I'm not someone who initiates harm, but I absolutely do not tolerate someone stepping on my neck. Since you dared to trample on my dignity, you should have been prepared to face the wrath of the sterling conglomerate. Luke stared at me blankly, his lips trembling violently. He finally realized the person sitting across from him was no longer the foolish woman who would endure grievances for a few sweet words. She was an apex predator holding absolute power. Everything he once had within his grasp was gone forever, ruined by his own arrogance and stupidity. Sign it. Stop wasting my time. I checked my watch, a trace of impatience in my tone. The guard stepped forward and handed Luke a cheap plastic pen. With his broken wrist and a heavy cast, Luke could only awkwardly grip the pen with his left hand. As the pen touched the thin paper, he wrote slowly and forcefully, every stroke feeling like he was slicing off his own flesh. When his crooked signature landed on the line, he seemed drained of all life, slumping back into the chair. The guard slid the signed papers through the slot. I grabbed the agreement, glanced at it to ensure the signature was valid, and didn't even bother to fold it properly, just rolling it into a tube. Have a good rehabilitation in here, Luke. With that, I hung up the phone without looking at his despairing face again. I stood up and walked steadily toward the exit of the visitation room. Samantha, don't go. Please, look at me one more time. Luke's agonizing wails echoed behind me, accompanied by the sound of his handcuffs smashing against the glass. But the noise was quickly drowned out by the guards barking orders and the dragging of chains as they hauled him away. I pushed open the heavy iron doors of Rikers Island. The sunlight poured down without obstruction, burning away the damp, cold aura of the prison. I handed the rolled-up divorce papers to Liam, who was waiting outside. Take this to the courthouse. Expedite it. Before the end of the business day, I want my divorce decree. Yes, Miss Sterling. Liam took the document respectfully and slid it into his briefcase. I took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air and stepped into the spacious backseat of the Maybach. That rotting past had been buried inside those high walls by my own hands. My life was just experiencing its dawn. The next morning, the Sterling estate in the Hamptons. The dining room smelled of comforting, rich food. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows onto the polished mahogany table, making the fine bone china gleam. My father, Richard, dressed in comfortable loungewear, looked ruddy and energetic. He used serving tongs to place a perfectly slow-cooked piece of braised short rib onto my plate. "Eat up, kiddo. You have been so busy cleaning up that mess, your face looks thinner," Richard said, his tone filled with a father's deep affection. "Thanks, Dad." I picked up my cup of premium oatmeal and took a sip. The warmth slid down my throat, settling perfectly in my stomach. No arguments, no schemes, no petty bickering over a few $100s of rent. In this house, I didn't need to fake being strong, nor did I need to compromise. This was the foundation built on bloodlines. How are the preparations for the board meeting this afternoon regarding the European green energy acquisition? Richard put down his fork, naturally shifting the topic to business. This was the standard dynamic between the Sterling father and daughter. I have finished reading the due diligence report. The risk models have been cleared by legal. I set down my spoon and dabbed my mouth with a napkin, my eyes sharp and clear. They want to use local regulatory barriers to pressure us into a 5% premium. In the negotiation this afternoon, I plan to immediately drop the 2 core patents we hold as our trump card. If they don't concede on the price, we initiate Plan B and pivot to the Southeast Asian market. Sterling must hold the initiative. Richard leaned back in his chair and let out a booming, hearty laugh. "Excellent. That is my daughter. You don't strike often, but when you do, it is a fatal blow. You have more killer instinct than I did at your age." His eyes filled with pride. "Those 3 years were rough on you. But look at it as a masterclass in the real world. It taught you the true, greedy nature of those bottom feeders." I smiled faintly, not disagreeing. The tuition for those 3 years was steep, but the clarity and transformation it bought me were worth the price. At 10:00 a.m., in the CEO's office on the top floor of Sterling Global's headquarters, this 3,000-square-foot office featured panoramic windows. Standing there, the entire skyline of Manhattan was laid out before me. The skyscrapers and the bustling traffic looked like a massive, precision-engineered machine, and I was the one holding the core gear. I wore a charcoal gray bespoke power suit, its sharp lines projecting unquestionable authority. An antique sapphire brooch pinned to my lapel whispered of quiet, generational wealth. "Miss Sterling, here is the final offer sheet for the acquisition. It requires your signature." Liam walked in with a stack of thick files, organizing them neatly on the massive desk. I walked over, picked up a solid gold Parker pen, and fluently signed Samantha Sterling at the bottom. The strokes were sharp, pressing firmly into the paper. Liam took the files but didn't leave immediately. He hesitated for a second, then lowered his voice. "Miss Sterling, our people passed along a little follow-up regarding the Vance family. I didn't know if you'd be interested in hearing it." "Go ahead," I said, capping the pen and returning it to its holder. After Luke went in, the South Bronx loan sharks realized the remaining assets couldn't even cover the interest. They stripped the house bare. The Greenwich mansion was officially seized by the feds and auctioned off. Luke's mother, Barbara, was kicked out onto the street. Liam's tone held a hint of undisguised satisfaction. She burned so many bridges with relatives and friends when her son had money that no one would take her in. I heard she is now renting a permanently leaking basement in the Bronx. With no income, this old lady who used to boss you around now takes a trash bag to the local markets every day to scavenge for discarded vegetables. She fights with the homeless over empty bottles. A few days ago, she fought a guy over some cans, and he kicked her, fracturing her leg. With no money for a hospital, she just limps around the streets begging. Even the stray dogs avoid her. Hearing this, Barbara's bitter face didn't even flash in my mind. Once, she had mocked my laundry skills, insulted my cooking, and cursed me daily as a barren freeloader. She firmly believed in the toxic, archaic mindset that women were mere accessories to men, tools to be trampled upon. Now, having lost the son she paraded as her trophy, she was instantly knocked back to her true form, reduced to the absolute dregs of society, unable to even secure basic survival. This was not my revenge. It was the harsh rule of society dealing its most just verdict to a parasite. And that woman, Chloe, Liam added. After she offended you at the Velvet Room, the manager was terrified of the blowback. He handed her straight over to the debt collectors. She owes hundreds of thousands in payday loans. She was dumped at an off-the-grid illegal labor camp somewhere in the Rust Belt to work off her debt. She will probably never walk out of those mountains for the rest of her life. Understood. My tone was incredibly flat. There was no wild joy of vengeance, nor a single ounce of pity. From this day forward, these names would be completely erased from my world. They weren't even qualified to be a footnote. I waved my hand, signaling Liam to go prepare for the meeting. The office returned to silence. Only the humidifier in the corner quietly puffed out white mist. I walked around the desk to the floor-to-ceiling windows, where a row of vibrant, rare exotic plants sat. I picked up an elegant copper watering can and tilted it slightly. Clear water poured out, sprinkling evenly over the broad, emerald leaves. The droplets sparkled under the sunlight, washing away the last traces of dust, revealing the purest, raw vitality beneath. I set the watering can down and looked out over the boundless blue sky above New York. Today's weather was spectacular. The sky over Manhattan was a washed, brilliant azure without a single cloud. The autumn sun poured unreservedly over the concrete jungle, making the glass facades of every skyscraper gleam. I remembered 3 years ago, during this exact season, wearing a cheap white sundress, following Luke into that dark, damp Brooklyn apartment. I thought back then that as long as there was love, flowers could bloom even in the mud. But reality had slapped me hard in the face. It brutally taught me that in this dog-eat-dog world, kindness without fangs is just seen as a doormat. Endurance without power is just taken for granted. Now, those pathetic days of cooking and cleaning, those suffocating years of being bullied by a mother-in-law and ignored by a husband, were buried in the ruins of the Vance family's collapse. The intercom on my desk suddenly rang, breaking the silence. I walked over and pressed the speaker button. Sterling, the European delegation and the board of directors are all seated in conference room 1. The final kickoff meeting for the billion-dollar acquisition is ready to begin whenever you are. Liam's professional, powerful voice came through the speaker. Understood. I'm on my way. I adjusted the collar of my blazer and took one last look at the vast blue sky outside. The absurd farce belonging to Luke Vance had permanently closed its curtains yesterday. And I, Samantha Sterling, was taking this unshakable power and absolute clarity forward to embrace the brilliant, radiant new life that truly belonged to me. I turned around, straightened my spine, and with purposeful steps, pushed open the heavy double doors leading to the pinnacle of power.